see you all. I don't know if some faces look familiar. I've seen one or two of you before. So welcome to this evening's entertainment. I'm John Ray, as you know, I guess, and I'm the lawyer that's the lawyer for the Gilbert family in the Long Island serial killer case. And I've also been the lawyer for several other people who are associated with the case, some of whom claim to have been victims of the Long Island serial killer, and I've represented them. I've been a lawyer for 43 years. I'm in my 43rd year. I've had many homicide cases over the course of my years, and I've been in this particular case since December 2011. So it's quite a few years that I've been involved, and throughout that time, I and my firm have investigated this case quite thoroughly, actually. Over the course of all those years, I've interviewed innumerable witnesses for innumerable hours, and my bookkeeper, manager, estimates from we put in time records for what we do, or at least I do in my firm. And the estimate is, when you put together my work and the firm's work, the people who worked on it, we put in probably somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 hours. So there are some critics, you read them on the internet, of some of the work I've done, and they say, oh, you just show off or whatever, because I wear fancy clothes, or maybe unusual clothes anyway. But I'd say contrast that with the actual work we've done on this, and the importance of that work over the course of years, and I think that the work then will speak for itself. So tonight, I'm going to use a slightly different approach than I have in other venues that Gina has very graciously had me speak at over the course of time in libraries all over Suffolk County and in other venues. I thought I'd try something a little different anyway, it's the same subject. But the approach I was considering using tonight is to say to you, listen, I'm not going to make a narrative presentation for you of the events. And I chose that because I said, most of the people who were going to buy a ticket and come here all over here just to hear me already know the basic facts, and most of you, if not all of you, have seen the various movies that have been made, one after the other, where they do the same thing over and over again. They show the narrative facts that they say are facts, and then you get your finality, which is not a finality at all, because nobody's been found guilty yet. And so if I do that here again, I don't know that I'm really reaching you properly. But instead, my theme is going to be that I'm going to present you with a series of facts, a series of pieces of evidence, which I say in the investigation of cases, evidence is like trail markers on a trail to a conclusion, to a destination. And so I'm going to present to you these trail markers, this evidence that I know about, that we've learned, and not necessarily that's in the hands of the police, some of which is and some of which isn't. But I'm going to present it that way to you tonight. And I'm going to talk about two subjects primarily. One is the Heuermann family, and two is the case of Shannan Gilbert. And I'll do them in that order, with certain facts that we know, and perhaps my spin on, my interpretation of some of those facts. But one thing I'm not doing is saying to you, aha, this is the killer, or they are the killers, right? Or the family are involved, and so on, in the killings and so forth. I'm not doing that. Instead, what I'm going to do is say, here are the markers. Here are the pieces of evidence that I have learned, we've garnered, and why don't you think about where those trail markers lead you to? And you draw your own conclusions. And I'll leave it to you, out of regard for you. And so, let me begin. If I had a podium, it would be a little easier. I'm going to read you a quote. All right? Quote, does everybody really believe everything they hear? Unquote. You know who said that? Peacock movie carried. Johanna Eller said that. That's what she said when she was interviewed on the Peacock movie. And by the way, the Peacock, if you've seen it, some of you, I know some don't have Peacock, so you don't get to see it, but there's 3 episodes made by 50 Cent's Productions. Those 3 episodes are not a documentary. They are not. They are a show. And she says that on the show, amongst many things that she says all along. Does everybody really believe everything they hear about her husband? I say that's a great quote about herself and her daughter, her whole family. Because, I'll go right to it, the Peacock show, which stirred up a great deal of controversy, and rightly so, and is recent, following the Gone Girls, which was a pretty good documentary. In the Peacock version of things, it was a show. It was a production. Now, I've done a lot of shows in my career, not only in this case, but I've had a lot of high-profile cases, you all know that. So, I've been on a lot of shows over the course of 43 years, and I can tell you that those productions are extremely carefully produced, extremely carefully rendered, shaped, edited, sliced up, patched together to a final end. And anybody in the business knows that. They're not real. You could say it's based on a true story, like they say in the movies, but it's not. In this case, it's not based on a true story, it's a production. And so, when I read on the internet all these people who come and say, oh, watch that show, that documentary, and look at Victoria, how she's starting to come to the realization that her father is a killer. Oh, and look at her face and how it's changing, and she's dealing with it, and she's trying to understand it internally, and they make all these interpretations, and the mother is clueless. It's a favorite. She's clueless. She's clueless. Really? It's a production. It's an invention. And how much has it been edited? You'll never know. But it's all very carefully rehearsed and crafted. So it's a very important piece of evidence for that very reason. Because those 2 people, the stars of that show, the Heuermann's family, they were paid a very substantial sum of money, as we all know, over $1 million, to do what they did for that show, to perform as they did perform in that show. So you cannot take it at face value, or at least a lot of it. You can't. And remember as well, interestingly, that the Peacock show is also produced by 50 Cent. Well, who's 50 Cent in relation to Long Island? Well, 50 Cent lived for a while in Huntington, and he's got a lot of ties to Long Island. He owns properties in various places. But one of his close friends was the man who represented him as an attorney, Mr. Robert Macedonio. Now, Bob Macedonio, I've known for many years. My child and his child performed in the same performance in Port Jefferson many years ago at the Dickens Festival. We've known each other for many, many years. And Bob Macedonio was 50 Cent's lawyer. But Bobby Macedonio is also Johanna Eller's and Victoria's lawyer. So it's well crafted, isn't it? Under the strong advice and control of Robert Macedonio. So if your lawyer is advising you that your lawyer is going to be with you when you perform involving your case, he's going to be there making sure you don't say anything he doesn't want you to say, making sure that you don't make the wrong gestures, making sure that you're well prepared for the questions. Indeed, since he's so connected to the production, making sure of the questions themselves. And so Robert Macedonio had the large part in controlling what you see. So what you see is not what you get. All right? And consider that Bob Macedonio, he made a nice chunk of change to be the lawyer. He was paid many, many, many thousands of dollars to do the work. So here we have a really interesting question. Perhaps it's an aside, perhaps it's not. And that is, Robert Macedonio, a lawyer, who was once disbarred and came back, he has a conflict of interest. A very fundamental, obvious conflict of interest. Because if he's paid by Peacock, which he was, and he's in the thrall of 50 Cent, he owes a duty to them, an obligation to them, right? To do as they wish. At the same time that he's a lawyer for the family, he owes an obligation to them. And the family's interests may be at odds with 50 Cent's interests or his production's interests. And which side does the lawyer take then? And what does he do then? These are things I don't know if they've been brought up before. I'm willing to talk about them. And so I think that's something that hasn't been said but needs to be said in public. Does everybody really believe anything they hear? Now, I'm going to say things in a sort of I won't say helter-skelter fashion, but it might be broken up because there are so many facts and we only have 2 hours. If I were to tell you what I know of these cases and related cases, we would be here for 8 hours, without exaggeration. And I'd be talking nonstop for 8 hours. And to give you an idea about productions, I don't know if this interests you, but when I've been on all these various shows that they filmed me for, Inside Edition and, all these, there's one show, several of them are like this. They call you in, or they come to my office and they film, they set up. They have crews of 10, 11 people with all different lighting devices to make the lighting look just so. They have all these different contraptions that they use in machinery to make the production. And they take, I'll give you an idea, the British film that's coming out, and I think the Gone Girls did as well, they both filmed me for almost 12 hours. 12 hours. Just me. And then when you actually see the Gone Girls film that was made, I think I appeared 3 times, and it's, clips of maybe a few seconds each time. And that's it, out of 12 hours of work. And you're sitting there under their lights and so on. Oh, they bring you lunch. And it's good lunch. But, so if you see that's what the treatment I got, can you imagine what it took to make the Peacock show with these 2 women? So when you see, for example, also, at the beginning, she's standing in her doorway of the 1,343 square foot house, and she's looking out with sort of a strange face, and then she turns and goes inside. That's all staged. That's all. They said, you know how many times she probably had to walk in and out before they picked the right one? Right? Yeah, that's what it's really like. So, trust nothing of what you saw. But I digress. I'm going to do this by hitting various facts, and we'll never get to them all. And I know you want to ask questions and have something to say, and I have to give you that too. So be patient. And if I ramble a little bit here and there, so what? You'll get a very good story, no matter what it is. There's a lot to all of this, and it's fascinating. And you might say, one other thing, there's an overarching theme to what I'm speaking about tonight, and that is not just follow the trail markers to a destination, but ask yourself this. I'm going to constantly be asking you this. Shouldn't this fact have been investigated? Shouldn't this have been looked at? And who would be the investigators? The official investigators of the police department. And I'm going to say that the overarching theme of what I'm talking about is, should the police have investigated this fact, that fact, this fact? And you will answer that question yourselves. So, just take this for example. You're in a 1,343 square foot house. Well, we all know from many of us coming from converted bungalows here in Suffolk County, that's a bungalow. That's a tiny bungalow. And I call upon all the mothers and wives in the audience to see if you confirm with me this. You live with your spouse or your partner in that size house for 20 some odd years, 26, 27 years maybe. You live there. You mean to tell me that you don't know what's going on in the basement? Name one of you who can honestly say, how? I never heard of this. What went on in the basement? How you can hear it. Name part of that house. And would you ever let your spouse just go down in the basement and hang out and you don't know what he's doing for 26 years? Don't worry about it. That's what you are asked to believe if you believe that woman sat there and told the truth when she was on Peacock. Okay? And if you go downstairs in that house, you don't come just to a bedroom, although there is that. You come to a metal door. How many people living in a tiny little house like that put up for the bedroom or a tiny room a big metal door? We're not talking, it was the biggest door in the house. Metal door, solid metal door. And the handle to get in it wasn't a handle, it was the kind of handle you have on a submarine that you turn. Did you notice that? Why would you have that? Well, I had 400 guns. Well, who are you protecting the guns from? Your family? Is there any evidence that any of them ever shot anybody? Or were about to? That you needed to put an iron or a metal door up and have it specially installed? Stop and think. What's obvious? I ask you this, is that a piece of evidence that should be looked at? Not just because of what he did behind that door, but because of what they knew about that door. If you knew that there was such a door in your house installed by your husband, you'd want to know what was behind it and why. And we know from the police investigation that there's a likelihood that some of the murders occurred in that room. Maybe not all of them, maybe all of them, we don't know. But, go ahead.
Do you know when he put the door in? Like what year?
I don't know. It may have been said, but nobody seems to have focused on it. That's an interesting question, very good question. Yeah, yeah. When did he put it up? But there it is, right? And there are all these guns that are in the room behind it. But supposedly it's unclear, but he grew up in that room. I believe there's some claim that that's where he grew up. So why the door? There can be only one bad reason, knowing the facts in this case, for that door. And how then could the family not know anything at all about what went on with regard to the door or what the door's purpose was? Somebody's lying to you, most likely, or twisting the facts, but all I do is say that's a piece of evidence along the trail. All right? Yeah.
Was the door part of the soundproof room?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
an entrance. So, I mean, so that when the gun goes off, nobody hears it?
But he wasn't even use any of the stuff, they said they weren't fired.
Right. Well, that we don't really know. I mean, there's various pieces of evidence where witnesses have come in and said he had guns, he fired them, he was a hunter. I mean, he has hunting licenses, we traced them. So, I don't know what guns he used, but he used some of them, or some guns somewhere, including pistols.
Yeah, just a quick one. Is there, why this focus on the wife and stuff? Even if she suspected something or whatever, I mean, there's a lot of dysfunctional relationships and scenarios and everything else. I mean, we don't really believe she had anything to do with this.
Well, you don't, sir, but that's your conclusion. You're allowed to think that.
Right, I mean, that's true. I mean, there seems to be some energy being spent on this. Is there does she have assets that's all been put in her name now, that she's somebody that they can go after? Because, I mean, could you answer that? I mean, they talk about most of the stuff happened while she was visiting abroad,
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying, small place, how could she not know? I mean, watch any true crime story, people live next to monsters, and they I mean, you really believe she's complicit in this? Like she helped them? Or that she was just being ignorant or didn't want to know? I mean, why energy on this?
Well, that's a good question. The first answer is that because Peacock put 3 episodes out on national television, and it just came out, and they're all 3 dealing with the 2 women speaking throughout the whole time. So
I didn't see it. I apologize. The 2 women, his wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes. Okay. That's the first reason. And I haven't said to you that they're killers. I haven't said that to you, but I have said to you that you need to look at what the police do to investigate this case. And is there anybody doubts that Rex Heuermann's circumstantial evidence that they have about him strongly point to him enough that he was indicted by a grand jury, enough that he's facing murder trials, but the people who lived there with him face nothing? That's what we're talking about. So that's why the energy is being spent on the other evidence that I've gathered lately on these issues, okay?
I have a question. So leading up to his arrest, years before, the police chiefs before, they just dissolved the FBI, but didn't let the FBI come in.
Yeah,
So,
we're going to come to that tonight.
Okay.
All right, on the Gilbert investigation.
Yeah.
We're going to come to that very point tonight about what the police didn't do
Right.
in investigating. And in this case, we know that right from the start, when Rex Heuermann was arrested on July 13th, 2 years ago almost, when he was arrested, we know that the police had his DNA and that they could trace it to a variety of the murders that took place.
There was a belt that was
There's a belt involved with hair and so on that comes from his family, etc. And they also had the pinging towers for his cell phones and so forth. They had a lot of very convincing evidence regarding him when they made the arrest. But we also know that right away on the very first bail application made by the district attorney who really gets his information from the police department. The DA, yeah, they do their own investigating somewhat, but the real investigators are the police. That's what their job is. They did the investigation. And their investigation, they said, and DA Gray Tierney said, in the bail application, that the mother, that this man acted alone, right, and that he was leading a double life, and that the family is definitely not involved because they were away on vacations. That's what he said. Now, if they were involved in the killings, whether they were killers or whether they were participants in some way with the bodies, either before they were killed or after they were killed, or long after they were killed even, I don't know. I have no idea. But don't you think those would be legitimate areas of inquiry for the police to make? Because if they really are involved like that, then you have real problem if that were true. So they should be doing that sort of thing. And instead, what did they do on the first bail application? They exonerated these people completely. So, as some of you may know from the other films you've seen, I didn't buy it. And so, when they said that the families were always on vacation, we checked in my office. And we checked one particular case of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. And she was killed in 2007, I believe, in July. And maybe it was August, July or August, I forget. I think it was July. Anyway, her family was supposedly, Rex's family was supposedly on vacation in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So they weren't home when the death occurred. And they could prove it. And if you watched the Peacock show, you would see they showed the bill on Peacock, the controversial bill for the hotel where the family stayed in Atlantic City. Is one of these sharing type hotels, you know, timeshares. And the bill shows that they arrived on July 6th. The murder takes place, or the disappearance of Maureen is on July 9th. And they check out of the hotel, I think, on July 17th. So they were gone the whole time when this took place. Except that's not accurate. And that's in the bail application, and that's in the movie that you just saw. But, not believing that, I called the hotel. And I got this hotel manager, and she went on to her computer, and I and 3 eyewitnesses sitting at my desk on speaker, we spoke to the manager. And she went on and she looked it up, the bill, she looked up they still had it, amazingly, they hadn't erased it. In 2007, it was still there. And she said, she read it across their bill. It's not the bill that was shown, by the way, by the DA. The bill that was shown was Rex Heuermann's Bank of America monthly statement. And on that statement, it had in brackets underneath the sojourn that took place, arrival under July 6th, in brackets. But it didn't say that was the actual date they arrived. That could have been the date that they planned to arrive. We don't know. But what we do know is that the manager went and carefully read off the entire bill to me from left to right. And she said, I asked her, I said, can you find a bill for a man named Rex Heuermann? And she looked and couldn't find it. I said, how about Johanna Eller? She said, oh, you mean Asa? Yes. Asa, yeah, she's right here. And she read it off. They arrived on July 17th. They did not arrive on July 6th. That was false. And she read it to me twice. I said, can you read it back again and tell me what each entry means? And she did. Unfortunately, I'm not a forensic investigator, so I didn't tape it. but I had 3 witnesses. One of them sits here tonight. And I said, I questioned her, are you sure? Do you know? Oh yeah, no. I said, what does the word arrival mean on this bill? She said, I don't know. I've never seen that before. We have no idea. That could be just a date that they predicted she would come. But she definitely got here on July 17th. I'm sorry, did I say 17th? July 14th. And then left. And I think they left on the 17th, is what happened. So, by her statement, looking at the computer, using the evidence that I'm telling you, they've got it wrong on at least one of those murders. All right? So when I announced that at my symposium last January, I announced that fact, that happened. And so I said that this needs to be investigated. It should be investigated. Keep in mind that District Attorney Tierney said in his application that there were 2 sources for his belief that they were on vacation. He says so in his paperwork. One was that bill. And they showed the bill in the papers, and they showed the bill on Peacock. 2 was Johanna Eller. She told him so, and he believed her.
Why?
That's what he said. I'm only reporting what was said. So, do you think maybe they ought to look at it again and investigate this a little deeper? I put to you another one. I know I told you I'd ramble a little bit, and rightly so. Okay? If you think about it, Heuermann writes to his wife. I call him Heuermann, it's Heuermann. I'm using a Scandinavian, I guess, but it's Heuermann, Rex Heuermann. Heuermann writes to his wife when she's in Iceland with the children, and I blanched a little bit at the word children. Now, yes, they are his children, but they are, or one of them is anyway, but they're in their 20s and 30s. They're adults, okay? Anyway, back to the point. He writes to them and says that, I think the words, how did it go? He says that he made a mess. He made a real mess in the bathroom. And so he redid the bathroom. Now, I call upon the people who take care of bathrooms in their homes. If you made a big mess, do you replace the bathroom? No. Isn't it true that you clean it up? So there's this very significant point there. Forensically. You know, if you're a forensic person, you pay attention to these details and you try to see what other meanings they could have. That's what you do for them. Okay? And if you've been in the business of crime, and as long as I have, investigation of it and so on, and if you're a cop and you're good at this and you're trained in this, you know that criminals oftentimes, when they're communicating, they use code words with each other all the time. I mean, I remember one of your neighbors, Peter Corso, the Silver Fox, who was a very famous killer and drug dealer, came from Mastic Shirley, and back in the 70s and 80s, I was his lawyer, I was his wife's lawyer, and his girlfriend's lawyer. Peter the Fox he was a big cocaine dealer, and they would talk to each other about how they would cut the coke and sell it and so on. They used code words. They talked about, hey, Peter, I heard it's your birthday. Gonna come over and cut the cake? And they would use codes to exchange. Of course, then what happens when they get arrested, the DA brings in experts, forensic experts, who say, these are what the code words mean. But that's what people who are involved in crime, they often do. Does it occur to anybody that it might be true that when he wrote that to them, that was a code word? Because the words don't really make sense. I made a big mess, therefore I replaced the bathroom. I made a big mess. Is that a code word? Conveying to them, it's time to come home, the body's here. I made a big mess.
Get out of this. I mean, you're talking about the conspiracies with drugs. I get that. You're in partnership with somebody. You're using code words. You're both in it. It's a conspiracy to make your money. What's the conspiracy? The family is in on this? Like, they're having sex with these people and killing them? I mean, I just don't understand this line that you were taking. With
You don't have to understand it, but I have the phone and you don't. So let's go. Who else? Is that a question?
What was her response when they left the code words with them in Iceland?
We don't know.
Oh,
I don't know, you know.
okay.
But is it possibly a code word? Okay? So now you come to other evidence as well. The district attorney, I had a sex worker who called me. I've had many different witnesses involved in this case who contacted me and given me statements and so on, as you may know. And one of them was a lady who was, she was British, but she had worked for a sex trafficking organization for years out of Brooklyn, and she had said that she serviced Rex Heuermann at his house many times. And she said he was a gentleman towards her and she never had any trouble with him. And she would go there sometimes with more than one sex worker. He would get multiple partners. And she was very credible. You can take it for what it's worth. She called me early on, right after the arrest took place. And we spent about several phone calls. She called. She'd just come up out of the blue, and I'd spent about 8 hours talking to her, trying to validate whether or not she was real. And she seemed to be. Anyway, she talks about Mrs. Eller coming out in the middle of the day, chasing her and another sex worker to the taxi, and because she believed they stole her iron. And she made them look through the cab to see if it was there. And she told me that from her organization, hundreds of sex workers serviced him over the years. So when I held the press conference and said that, I was scoffed at for this kind of a thing and for even bringing it up. And everyone said, oh, he's crazy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, there was a witness who came, for what it's worth. Several months later, Ray Tierney said in one of the bail applications, he was serviced by hundreds of prostitutes. That's what he said. He mirrored my words. And that's because it was true. Now, how many of you who are homemakers in your tiny little house of 1,343 square feet, how many of you who were in that situation would not know about hundreds of sex workers being serviced in your house? Okay, it's absurd. It's absurd. And to say, well, that's okay, that doesn't mean anything either. I guess maybe it doesn't, but maybe it does. I'm not saying it does, I'm saying they need to investigate it. It could turn out to be completely benign. And all she did is stay and watch, as her husband did all these things. And the sex worker who told me that said the children were home at the time. Take it for what it's worth. It should be investigated.
So will Ray Tierney will he allow for Elsa to be indicted, or?
All I'm saying is there should be an investigation. Maybe it will not lead, it'll lead nowhere. Very often things do. But how can you look at these markers and not think that there should be further looking at these things? How could you possibly do that? And then we haven't even started yet.
Will she be a witness in the case?
Pardon me?
Will she be a witness in the case? If called to be a witness?
That's a great question. I don't know what the DA's strategy is, but she could certainly be called, she, you know, for what it's worth, but she's denying knowledge of any of this. She just, you know, supposedly knows nothing.
So did they ever like investigate her cell phone activity and see exactly where she was? Because I think the way they caught him from the cell phone from Midtown to, you know, Massapequa and stuff, they could do the same thing with her to.
There doesn't seem to be any evidence of that, but they may have it and just not release it. I don't know. But they never released a single, you know, if they had calls that exonerated the family, they could have published that in the bail application, but they didn't. So it's an interesting question.
If they had things that did incriminate them, they would have put that there.
Not necessarily, and that's my point. Is it maybe not. All right, they presuppose certain things that are just not true. And
I mean, with that whole Atlantic City thing, they could easily like check her cell phone records. and
Yeah.
see exactly when she arrived.
Where she was
The
and so on.
17th or the 6th.
yeah, I don't know what they did with that, but one thing that did happen was that Robert Macedonio and the lawyer at that time who represented the children, a guy named Vesmitev, who was my former junior partner, by the way, they claimed immediately, the next day they held press conferences together, or separately, sorry, and they both said, John Ray's a liar, and we'll prove it. We are now, that was in January of last year, and we have never heard that they proved that. And the DA has not looked at it. When some reporters asked about, have you looked at it, they gave no comment. So I don't really know the answer to your question. But hundreds of prostitutes, is what the district attorney said. And keep in mind that also then on the Peacock denied that happened. She said there's no way that ever happened. Why is she denying it? Wood chips. Wood chips are an interesting issue in this case. There were two sex workers who were murdered in the Manorville and Patchogue area, Rita Tangredi and Colleen McNamee. The man that was arrested for that and convicted for that crime was John Bitroff from Manorville. And when these girls were found, they were all missing a shoe. And when I say all, there's another girl coming, Sandra Castilla. They were missing a shoe. They were all strangled. They were all mutilated. And their bodies were all posed in certain positions with their deaths. Those two women had the semen of John Bitroff in them. So he was convicted of murdering them. He's on appeal right now. But one of the strong pieces of evidence that they used against him at the trial were wood chips that were sprinkled in a sort of a ritualistic fashion around these women's bodies. And he's a carpenter. And so the DA at that time made that argument to the jury. He's a carpenter, wood chips found in his truck. You know, he's got semen in both of them. He's the guy, okay? And so he's in jail appealing it as we speak. From that, the police then concluded and made it very strong and made it public that the very likely suspect in the murder of Sandra Castilla, who's found out in the Hamptons, right? That the killer of her was also John Bitroff, because there were wood chips sprinkled all around that body as well. That woman was strangled. Her body was staged, posed, and by the way, all of them were found naked. So the DA or the police kept saying, he's the guy, we just have to get the evidence, but he's very likely the suspect, he's the most likely guy. And for years they maintained that. And now, after they did a DNA test on the hair that was found on her, it turns out that it was Rex Heuermann. So the DA was dead wrong. I used the phrase purposely. Okay? The DA was dead wrong on that investigation. And the hair, since you might think it's, maybe you'll start to see how important it is, the hair belonged to his first wife.
1990.
Yeah, something, yeah, I forget the dates. But, and so that's how they connected. But if the wood chips are there, and it's not Bitroff, but the wood chips were on the other two who seemed very similarly killed, like Castilla, might your mind say, something else ought to be done about investigating this? And the police had it all wrong. Maybe they're making other mistakes too.
But Bitroff's DNA was found on two of the victims.
Yes, yeah, no question. But Heuermann is the killer of the other one, who matches the other two.
Was it like a copy?
It looks like they're very similar, extremely similar, copycatish, yes. And although the posing of the bodies for the two of them, for Rita and Colleen, was in one fashion, and I believe that Castilla was posed in a slightly different way with her legs lifted up or something, but that's the way it was. So, I get a call years ago now, what, 2 years hence, I get a call from a fellow, this is before all the wood chips became an issue, and he was a person who rented out wood chip machines, and he had personally delivered a wood chipping machine to Rex Heuermann at his house in Massapequa Park, and he could describe the interior of the garage before it was made public, and he explained to me everything. He had a big argument with Heuermann. Heuermann got very angry because the machine wouldn't work, so he had to deliver a brand new one. He had to switch the machines. Went through a whole thing. He was a legitimate witness. And there were wood chips being made because Rex Heuermann also was a craftsman of furniture that he built in his garage. So the wood chips on McNamee and Tangredi, could they have been from him? And that ought to bring up another, should that be investigated? Should the relationship between Bitroff, who was a hunter, in the same neighborhood where these girls are found, and where Jessica Taylor is found, and Valerie Mack's parts are found, should he, who was a hunter, possibly be investigated for having a connection with Rex Heuermann, who was also a hunter, and also had the chips? Does it suggest the possibility that that should be investigated, their connection? And how would that connection come about? It's an important question, I think.
I was just gonna ask if they knew each other.
We don't know. We don't know. At least we don't know. But if the police did find such a connection, surely they'd let us know. But they haven't. But they've looked sufficiently.
Claiming he's innocent now, and it's all Rex Heuermann.
He was always claiming he was innocent, Bitroff, and he was always claiming, he still is, that they got this all wrong at the trial, and he's got a very good appeal. The Legal Aid Society, they get a bad rap off, and they did a marvelous job on the appeal, and I don't know what'll come of it. I mean, those things are hard to win, but their papers are really good on that issue before the connection was made with you.
Okay, but with the other victims that are linked to Rex Heuermann, was his sperm ever found on their bodies, or was it just little pieces of hair?
Just the hair, as far as we know, from Heuermann's first wife on Sandra Castilla. But now he's charged with that murder. So shouldn't they try to look and see if there's a connection? They both belong to hunting clubs. I don't know if they belong to the same clubs.
Sex with them, and then Rex Heuermann just murdered them. Right.
You don't know.
And there were sex workers, so maybe they went to multiple homes in one night, right?
Well, there's other evidence that I'm going to keep putting before you tonight for you to follow the trail yourself and see what else could be involved here. Could be. I don't know if there is. No, I've gone down many roads with witnesses who were very credible and then turned out not to be so. And I've been on so many dead ends of investigations, you have no idea. We had a witness take us to the beach. He was very credible on the phone. He was a working class guy and really just down home guy. And he had seen somebody buried on the beach and he gave us reasons why. And we went with him and turned out he was not quite what he sounded like when we talked to him. And you do that again and again and again. We've had that, so.
Shannan Gilbert was the first to go.
No, she wasn't.
That was
She
his client.
disappeared and then
Oh.
the investigation started. They were looking.
Yeah, they were looking for her.
Oh,
Yeah.
was there someone?
So, anyway, okay. So the wood chips is an important issue, I think, don't you think, okay? Looking around the Heuermann house that you're now able to see through the Peacock, did anybody notice the decorations? I mean, they were all boxes. The DA had torn the place apart. It wasn't in great shape in the first place from what we know, but there still were decorations in that house. You could, if you paid close attention to the decorations, I did. One of the decorations is a hanging, sort of like a, what would you call it? Like a sheet, a hanging sheet with a picture of the devil on it, right? But not like a funny devil or a clever devil or whatever, but it's Baphomet. It's a picture of Baphomet, the Church of Satan, located in San Francisco. They count him as, there's a statue of him as the symbol of the devil. And that's the picture that's hanging in their house. It's shown, they do it close up on the camera of it. It's Baphomet. It's a strange goat head with fingers like this. And it's kind of well known at this point because in one school out west somewhere, the club, or Midwest, the club tried to put in high school a Satan club, and they used Baphomet, and they had a big lawsuit over it. And Anton LaVey, who was the head of the Church of Satan in San Francisco, he made that their symbol of Satan. And that's in their home. That's what they decorate in their home, is that symbol. Behind it is an astrological hanging of some kind. I don't know what it really is. You can't tell, but you can tell that's what it is. And next to it hangs another hanging cloth, and on that there are these fairly salacious-looking angels, or not angels, but fairies. And it's hold on. Well, it's these fairies holding a pumpkin with vicious teeth, and inside the pumpkin's mouth is a human skull, and that's up there too. So everybody says, well, everybody kind of today, lots of people do goth. Goth is fine. I mean, what's wrong with you? Why do you think about that? How could you even mention that? I mean, people do goth. What's so wrong with that? And well, okay, maybe, but is it true that just because you do goth, it's all okay? All gothic things are okay, like that? How many of you have a picture of the devil hanging on your wall? Right? And it's in the whole, it's in the, it's in the whole family's home, that little home. There it is. And so, what does it suggest? That's something that should be investigated. It's not nothing. Sure.
If this production was curated, why do you think they chose to leave that?
That's a good question. It's a great question. I don't know. It's fascinating that they did that. And if they pan around, and you can see in other parts of the house, there's statues of wild dragons, and there's a statue of like this weird angelic-like figure, but it's not an angel, but with wings. If you look, you'll see it in all the decorations in the house. So it's a great question. Why did they do that? But they did it. And one of the answers lies possibly in this. If you look at Victoria, and I've done a very controversial press conference on Victoria already, okay? And I'll talk about that in a moment. But if you look at Victoria, in one of her shots where she's wearing, she's plain, she's not goth, like her real self is goth, she dresses up as goth. But here she is, plain Victoria, and she's sitting here with her hands folded. And on her finger is a black snake ring with the snake curling up like this. So it's very, pronounced and very visible. She's sitting with that. She wants to appear that way. She chose that. Why? Well, it's the same Victoria who, as I pointed out at my press conference last year, she was looking at, we went and we found, she erased all of her, many of her, sorry?
Did she have paintings or something?
I couldn't hear what you said. No, you were going to say?
Social media.
What?
Social media.
Social media, yeah, thank you. In the social media, she erased most of everything she had. So did her mother, by the way. They both erased it. Oddly why? Should be investigated, maybe? But she erased it, except she didn't get it all. We found the rest of it. And what we found was that she was looking at pictures of the most horrifying, perverse, sexual, and bloody murder that you could watch. All right? Some of them were cartoons, but some of them were not. And the ones that were not, one of them was a disemboweled woman with guts pouring out. Another one was with her legs chopped off and arms chopped off. There were cannibal pictures of cannibalism. She's looking at all these things. Well, it's just God. I mean, that's just, it could be fantasy, right, that she's into. But she happens to be into that in this situation, the same way her father allegedly chopped up those women. She's looking at exactly the same pictures. And here's what's really interesting. One of her pictures, I have them here if you want to look at her later on. One of her pictures is of a bunch of people hanging, right? And they all have one shoe off. These girls all had one shoe off, MacMe and the other ones. So it's kind of, should that be looked at, investigated? Could that be something? Could be, right? It's not nothing. And then when the police broke into the house the first time, they said thoroughly. So then a year later, these great workers who said they did their job thoroughly had to go back and break in again. A year later, after everything had been cleaned, whitewashed, whatever, who knows, they break in again. And the second time they break in, as they go in, we know that on the kitchen table, they report, is a book. And it is a book made in the 1920s by a police officer in San Francisco who took photographs of horrible murders and published them as a completely perverse book. And it was so perverse that the Church of Satan in San Francisco, the same church, took that book, and Anton LaVey, they made a Mondo movie. They made actually 3 versions of a Mondo movie from that book, and he does all the voiceovers in that book. It becomes the cult Bible, as it were, that book. That book was on the kitchen table, and the only one home, the mother had been in another state, was the 28-year-old woman, Victoria. And that book was on the kitchen table. Now, why is that book on the kitchen table? Well, it could just be fantasy and so on. But it has those pictures of women chopped up and so on. The same thing. By the way, if you look at the movie, the picture, the title picture for the title of the movie, you'll see a hand. You see in the background of what body work the sound, I guess. And there's a hand laying face up, or palm up, with red fingernails and covered with sand, coming out of the sand. That's the introduction. I met with a police officer who did the investigation the initial investigation. He was, a detective on the case, along with his partner. And so you see, I'm not idle. We're working at all times on this. So I met with him, and he told me that when he came across the body, he and his partner came across the body that was there, it was laying with the hands, both hands, palm up, with their fingers coming out with long red fingernails on them. So whoever made that script for the Peacock movie had to have gotten that information from the police. So there was a connection between the two. Which it's an interesting thing, because who would know that? But this cop, he told us that before Peacock was shown, so he wouldn't have known it, but that was there. And what does it mean? I don't know, but certainly it shows a connection between the cops. And by the way, the story that the police gave of that the bodies were found for the Gilgo 4 because a dog and his trainer were just wandering and they happened to come across it. According to this detective that I met with, who seems like a very credible detective of great service, many years in the county, he said that's not what happened. He said they found the body. And this is all another story. It's just not the actual thing that happened. Do you believe him? I don't know. But should that be looked at? Because why would there be a different story? Two very opposite stories about how this occurred.
I heard that he let the dog loose because he had to go to the bathroom with the dog, and then that's when the bones were found.
I don't know. All I know is what they said. That's what they said, and that's what this detective said. So you take it for what it's worth. But sticking with things like that, when Victoria gets interviewed, and you notice, if you saw her real picture with the way she normally dresses, she's completely covered in black. She's dark. She's a goth. Okay, be goth, but then don't pretend you're not for the TV. All right. But anyway, when she's interviewed, here's what she says when she's asked. Did your father abuse you when you were a child? And she says, quote, I cannot really recall him being like that, unquote. Is that the answer you would give if your father never abused you? It's kind of an odd answer, isn't it? Should that be investigated? We do, on lesser evidence, we investigate child abuse all the time. Shouldn't that be investigated? Something happened here. I don't blame the girl. But that kind of equivocal, it sounds almost like a legal answer that she gave. It sounds like a lawyer speaking. And then the mother says, I love him. I still love him. And so much does she love him that she divorced him right away, but as the daughter said, if you don't think this is all about money for them, and that the posturing cannot be trusted whatsoever, what did the daughter say? We got divorced to protect the assets. Okay? They got divorced to protect the assets. But she goes on, or says, I love him. In fact, when I talked to him in prison, it was like going on a first date again. That's what she said. So people go, oh, she's clueless. Oh, there's something. Really? She's posed that. She's done that. It's already been rehearsed. And think about that. Think about that statement. What kind of person could still love such a person? Say, well, love is strong. Really? Well, I thought about it and said to myself, you know what? I believe her. I believe that she loves him. I think that's one of the few times that she was sincere. But would it also be possibly true that she loves him because his behavior and her behavior were the same.
Yeah.
That they connected in that way. So she's not in the least bit offended by what he did because of what she made. So it's a thought, isn't it?
I think they traumatize the kids. You don't know what they saw in their life.
True.
I think they have a lot of problems.
Well, I have brought with me tonight, and I won't wear you out with it, but we have studied many other serial killers on Long Island, especially where there seems to be an awful lot of them, and in other places throughout the country. And you would be amazed how many of them have exactly the same relationships with their families, and some of whom involved the children in the murders, and didn't do it necessarily. In one case, they actually had the kids do the murders, but they brought the kids to the scenes. And remember when Victoria, when the first murder we know about was done, she was 3 years old, so she couldn't possibly be involved in the murder unless she was brought there, But remember another thing. We say, why should we concentrate on them? Rex Heuermann is accused by the DA of murders because of the hairs that are found on the bodies of these women. 2 of those hairs are Victoria's, right? On the skulls of the women, 2 of the hairs are found, laying on the skulls. And 2 of the hairs are found that belong to Ossa. One of them on the belt. Okay, and then there's Rex hair found as well. But if you take that fact, and then to add this, I told you about the perverse picture she's looking at. I got from many of the media, oh, how could you attack that poor little girl? Like she's just being goth. Well, okay. Maybe so. But the indictment of Rex Heuermann was based largely upon, not only upon, but largely upon hair, the child and the wife's hair, and the DA goes on about the terribly perverse pictures that they found that he was looking at on his internet. The same kind of picture she was looking at. But he gets indicted and she gets a walk. And don't you think that needs to be investigated?
Could he have been using her computer?
Yes. And she could have been using his too. Of course. Could very well be. Good question. Good point. She worked in his office very closely with him at all times. So, I also ask you another question. How could these 2 people continue to live together? Mother who says, he didn't do any of this, that's ridiculous. It's bullshit. That's what she said on the show. It's bullshit. And the daughter who says, I think Daddy did it. In fact, she admits Daddy did it. All right? So, your daughter says, your husband did it. And you say he didn't. And it's just a nice academic, platonic discussion at home in the 1,343 square foot house. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound normal? That's because it's all being staged. If you take a look at the first picture of the mother when she was first shown walking in front of her house and she gives the middle finger to the press and so on, and she sits down, she's wearing this red bracelet, cloth, like a woven blood bracelet, in the picture. And if you know anything about cults, as we've studied it now in great length about this, many of those, by the way, the serial murders in the United States and in Long Island are connected to cults. Many of them are, starting with Charles Manson. She is wearing what appears to be the same wristband that you wear if you are into the Kabbalah, which is, and there are many non-Jewish versions of Kabbalah. And the Church of Satan officially claims that Kabbalah is their book. And in it, there's part of the Bible that tells something, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but that you should wear a red lanyard on your hand, but a red bracelet. Woven type thing. She's got it on in that picture. When I brought it up, next thing you know, whenever you see it, no more red. It's gone. By the way, she condemns herself, I don't know if you realized it or not, in what she said when she said, hey, this man couldn't have done all this if he, these terrible things. If he's such a genius, he's not bright enough to do this. He's not bright enough to have killed him. If she's right, then think about the implications of her meaning. Pardon me? What does it mean then? If he's not bright enough to do it by himself, I don't know what it means. But it should be investigated. Okay? But she said that, and that's when she said it's all bullshit. That's what she said. There's much more that you take from this, but I'm just giving you some of the highlights. Okay? Think about this as well. When she also she claimed that he grew up in that bedroom. Well, if you know that's where he grew up, wouldn't you at some point wonder why, back to the door, is a door on there all of a sudden? That's where he grew up. There's something wrong there. I come to another thing. You follow the evidence where it takes you, you pay attention to the details, no matter how offensive or upsetting they might be, or peculiar, or even bizarre. Did you look at her teeth? Okay. Now, some people say, oh, the poor woman, right, I get it. Nobody wants to look like that. But how did that happen? In my experience with people involved in crime, very, very typically that kind of condition of teeth comes from the use of drugs. Various kinds of drugs like crystal meth, there's various other drugs that this could happen with as well. But I don't say she's doing that, but somebody should be investigating that. And if she was, does that explain a lot of what else happened here? It's something that should be looked at.
But she was sick, she had cancer.
She says she had cancer. I'd like to see the evidence of that. But, it should be investigated. All these things should be investigated. But does cancer do that to your teeth and you just sit there with all those green teeth like that with what's left of them? I don't think so. But it's an issue. It's an issue. Are there drugs involved in this? But that brings me to another member of the family, which is a very interesting member. And that's the sister of her name is Johanna Eller. She lives 5 minutes away from them. And she was a public figure of sorts. She ran for Congress once from the same district. And I think she teaches at St. John's maybe, or she went to St. John's, I forget which. But in any event, when Heuermann was first arrested, one of the young reporters went to her home and knocked on the door to see what's what. She answered the door and she told the reporter, who told me, that she acted very unusually. She acted like she didn't, not only did she not know about anything, but she hadn't had a relationship with her sister. She doesn't know her that well. She distanced herself from the whole thing. Said, I didn't know nothing. She was completely taken by surprise, but she wasn't horrified. So we looked into that situation, and Johanna Eller, when you go on her social media, she's an occultist. She is involved deeply in and she says so. She's involved in a variety of occultist things. Let me see if I can help you out with what they are. She self-identifies as a Gnostic Christian and a Dacian, from ancient Dacian stock. The Dacians were an Indo-European tribe. She's from Denmark. Her name, they're Icelandic, but the name is Danish, actually. And so she said she identifies with the Dacians, which they practice human sacrifice, strangulating all their victims, biting them on the neck, practicing hypnosis in battle, and so on. And she holds herself out as being the heir of that. She writes books. She wrote 2 books, one of them involving a woman being murdered and tortured, and the other one being involved in the occult. This is the family. Now, she distanced herself, but I checked and we found that Rex, not only has he been in several states, as we know, he traveled a lot. He's been in Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Las Vegas, Arizona. There's various places where he's frequented and where certain people have come forward and said they were victims and so on. I don't know. But we found out he was also in Alaska. And so I checked and I subpoenaed and I got the record of his record in Alaska. He has a hunting license in Alaska, in Anchorage. Johanna Eller has a house in Anchorage, Johanna. And Craig, his brother, who killed a police officer, has a telephone registered in Anchorage, Alaska. So they're all connected to Anchorage. I don't know why, but it's not as if they wouldn't have come across each other. It seems very odd under those circumstances, but so much for that. But that's not his only relative. And you know, according to his wife, he's close with his relatives.
What about Craig? Is he being investigated?
Who?
Craig.
Great. Well, I don't know how much they investigated him. The police did investigate somewhat. I mean, from what I could tell, he had the car, the vehicle, the Avalanche, down there at his property in South Carolina? Yeah. But I don't know how much he's pretty violent according to his neighbors.
He is.
You know?
I went to school with him.
Yeah, okay, so.
Who was this?
His brother is as well. But, he's close with his relatives more or less over the course of time. And one of his other relatives was his cousin, who's Kenneth Heuermann. If any of you heard of Kenneth, he was a Lutheran minister who lived in Merrick, which from Massapequa Park to Merrick is what, a 15-minute drive, and they're both on the South Shore. And no doubt their families interacted through the parents and grandparents. But Kenneth Heuermann was involved in the production of child pornography and satanic ritual abuse. We know that Rex visited, he was upstate, by the way, and we know that Rex would visit his relatives upstate. We don't know exactly where. But he has a whole history of, he ended up being charged with, accused by a variety of other people, of children, saying that he sexually abused them, put them on an altar, did terrible things to them, but he dies. So we can't ask him about that. But that's another relative in his family, kind of an interesting relative to have under the circumstances. We also know that Rex possessed what we would call snuff films by any standard. And the DA mentions, they don't call them snuff films, but that's what they are, because the women in them are dead after the movie's over. But he had a variety of those where he sexualized decapitated women. You can't get these kinds of films that are made on the mass market. The snuff film, they're black market things, they're really deep, dark black market things to get, but they're worth a lot of money. And Rex was hungry, so was his wife, for money. They engaged in all kinds of weird, staging staging car accidents. He would stage car accidents and then he would sue. You know, he'd go and pretend he got hit by a car and then he'd sue. And because they were really hungry for money. Why? Why did they need all this money? Because he was making, from what I could see from his records, his financial records, he made millions of dollars as an architect. He did fine. Where did the money go? You know, so sex, we know it costs a lot of money. Drugs cost a lot of money. Gambling cost a lot of money. They were gamblers. You know, so, but they needed money, so that he would stage these kinds of things. And snuff films would be very profitable. Now, we don't know that, the DA says that they had found these snuff films, but they, you know, if you buy a snuff film, the average snuff film costs at least $10,000. It can cost as much as $100,000. So,
what's he making?
he was watching them, but could he have also been making them? Yeah, he could have been. Yeah. But we know that other serial killers were purveyors of snuff films. That Leonard Lake, David Parker Ray, no relation that I know of. Mark Dutroux in his ring in Belgium. They were all purveyors of snuff films. There are many others as well I could mention to you. But so where does that leave us with Heuermann? Plenty for you to chew on, think about, and you could say, well, none of that proves anything. Maybe it doesn't, but don't you think to know whether it does, it needs to be investigated and has not been? That's the problem. First Heuermann.
Are there any possibility of any victims that survived that won't come forward, or?
Yes, because people have come forward to me over the course of 2 years in various times where they're really reluctant to come forward. Then they do. Some of them refuse to give affidavits. They don't want to be seen in public. They came forward because almost uniformly they don't trust the police. So they came to me, which is why Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, who helped to break this thing, held a press conference with me and said, if you are afraid to come forward and talk to the police, call John Ray. So it's not something that I just invented by myself. The police commissioner and I had a partnership. Go ahead.
Yes, to go back to that, when you spoke with the person in Atlantic City about the receipt,
Right.
You were able to subpoena stuff in Alaska. Were you able to subpoena or get a hard copy of the proof that the wife and daughter were really in Atlantic City?
No.
I know you want to speak phone with 3 people,
Yeah.
but they were reading that off to you. She said you had the records from 2007, 2009. No hard copy of that?
No, because we're not allowed to subpoena if I don't have a case pending for it. The Alaskan thing I could do by FOIL.
Right.
Okay, so I got that by FOIL, but this is a private company, they're not gonna give you anything by FOIL.
And then secondly, you know, I don't know the guy that you would probably know. There was a German guy, sleuth, like an internet sleuth guy. He said something very interesting that has really come to this whole Suffolk County Police Department with Burke and the previous guy, and just the corruption. And the way he described it was that Suffolk County is a peninsula. You know, there's not a lot of interactions with other agencies. So Burke, I mean, the fact that Burke was a captain, it just proves the whole corruption. And then the DA that got him the job, and I forgot his name, the old guy. Yeah, and that whole thing was so corrupt. And they didn't want the FBI in. So yeah, the police dropped a lot of stuff, and they didn't want the FBI in because of Burke and a bunch of other stuff. So I totally get that. And then John, I'm gonna ask you just to respond to this. It wasn't my question coming in. You alluded to it a little bit that people had.
Your girlfriend's smiling.
Yeah, well, she knows that. You know, what do you say to people that, you know, would call you a grifter or somebody that's making money off the sensationalism of this? And I say this respectfully.
It's a good question. It's a fair question.
I didn't see the Peacock thing, and I'll be honest with you, I was a little taken by this whole family thing. I'm gonna go watch it for reference.
Okay.
But what would you say to people that are saying, hey, he's just making up some crazy stuff to keep himself relevant, to keep himself employed, or whatever the case may be?
That's a great question. It's a fair question. I've been called grifter, is the word I've seen on Reddit, which I rarely look at, but when I do, there it is. There's a group of people who really don't like me. You're allowed to. I forgive them. And that I'm just trying to get on, to stay in the spotlight, which is what Macedonio said about me as well. So you're right, that those accusations have been made. And the answer is pretty easy, I think, and that is that I took the case with Shannan Gilbert, through Mary Gilbert, the mother, and I represented the Gilbert family. And when Mary's other daughter, Sarah, murdered her mother, I took that case as well and represented her and the family. And I also represented many of these other people who've come forward. They have problems, so I tell them, I'll fix your problem, just talk to me, tell me what you know. And I've taken on, maybe innumerable, but I don't know how many. I've taken on maybe 20, maybe 30 cases of other people who've been involved in this and have come forward. Every one of them I took on pro bono. I have never charged a penny for anyone. The only thing that's ever been paid to me was that the family in Oak Beach gave me money to pay for, I videotaped Dr. Peter Hackett at his deposition. That cost a lot of money. I didn't have it, they paid for it. They didn't pay for me, they paid for that. And the only other thing I got is I formed a not-for-profit charitable organization called the Magdalene Dismas Legal Services Society. And I named it after St. Mary Magdalene, who was possessed by 7 devils, and she ends up becoming the first one to see the open grave, and she stands at the foot of the cross, one of the few that was allowed in history to do that. And she had 7 devils. And Dismas was a good thief to the right of Christ on the cross, who was the first one into heaven. Christ said, "You will be with me this day in paradise." So he was a thief. So I named it after people who were pressed down, crushed by the system, and some of them buried alive by the system, by the institutionalization of the system. And I don't just mean people who are criminal. I've done family court cases, I've done school cases, and so on, through Magdalene Dismas for free. When people want to donate, I tell them, donate to Magdalene Dismas. She's going to give me a check tonight that's made out to Magdalene Dismas. I don't get it. So always I've done it free. That should say a lot when you put in, I'm a little tiny sole practitioner virtually now in my older years, and I have an associate, but that's it. And I don't make a lot of money. I'm not knocking them dead. And people say, well, you're on TV, you must make everybody call you. No. People say, you're famous, so I'm afraid to call you. They don't want to talk to you. They're scared. They think I'll cost them a fortune. So I don't make money that way. I never did. And I've had enough fame over the course of years. I don't need it. Those are my answers. I really do it because I got into it with the idea that I would help somebody mercifully and bring a dose of mercy into her life, and that was Mary Gilbert. And I say the same for the rest of all of this. It's an act of mercy, and all of what I'm doing, think about it, 30,000, 50,000 hours, and I'm trying to still make a living. It's not easy. And I've been personally threatened. My family's been threatened many times, and we still go. We still do it. And I don't, to finish the answer, I said it was easy, but maybe it wasn't. I don't believe that I'm involved in the quest for justice. That's for other people. That's for a jury someday, maybe for the DA, maybe for a judge, but it's not for me. My job is not that. I don't count it as that. I think that the people who are already gone now, their souls are somewhere, they are not quiet. They can't be made quiet unless some mercy is shown to them. And there's no better way of showing them mercy than for the living who are still here to know the truth. So seeking the truth is far more important than seeking justice. Justice is a cold, hard, granite being. Mercy is something else. And so I seek mercy. That's my answer to your question. Moving on to Shannan Gilbert. We don't have that much time left, but in Shannan Gilbert, it's fascinating what I'm about to tell you. Let me find my notes, if you don't mind. Oh, here they are. Okay. Something bothered me about Shannan Gilbert's initial disappearance. We all know the story as it's told by the police. She wandered into the marsh by herself, probably on drugs, confused, got lost, and died by natural causes. As Detective Byron, the head of the Homicide Bureau, said at a big press conference that he held on April 13th, back 2 years ago, he said, she died of a tragic accident. These are homicide people who say that. Homicide cops are completely ensconced in evidence to convict people. That's what they do for a living. If they arrest you and they can't convict you, they're in trouble. So they know their evidence, and they base everything on evidence. And this is the first time I've ever seen it, that the head of homicide declares that a woman died of a tragic accident and there's no evidence whatsoever of a tragic accident. Zero. And if you ask Byra what was the accident, he can't tell you. Did you ever hear of the homicide cop saying something like that? Something's wrong with that picture. But I digress, because what bothered me was not just that she said, they're trying to kill me, when she called 911, said it several times, they're trying to kill me. And not that she screamed a terrible blood-curdling scream as she ran out of that house and was confronted by somebody. No, not that. Not that she said to Michael Pack, her driver, you're part of this. Not that. What bothered me first and foremost was how she got there from New York. Why was she there? Because if you talk to Brewer, he claimed that she was a $300 trip. Okay? And no such money was found on her. But nobody, if you believe the police, nobody confronted her. So if he paid her, where's the money? $300? Gone. That doesn't make any sense. And furthermore, what bothered me, I said, wait a minute. I met Michael Pack. I had lunch with him in a diner and I've watched him. Then I took his testimony twice. I took him under oath. I know him pretty well. And there's one thing that Michael Pack really loves, and that's money. He worried about the quarters that he put on the table to leave a tip. I noticed these things. Pay attention. He's completely ensconced in money. He would take his van, or what was he driving, a 4x4 SUV? He would take his SUV from Manhattan at midnight and drive all the way to Oak Beach and back. The gas alone wasn't worth the trip because he only gets a cut of Shannon's fee. So what was his cut? He didn't say. He never said. He wouldn't say. Would he do that? Would you think a guy would do that? That bothered me. I said, something's wrong with the story. You see? And then I heard that, from Brewer, I took Brewer's testimony. I took his testimony 3 times. Okay? From Brewer, he claimed that he paid her. But like I said, there was no exchange. Then he claimed he did not have sex with her. He told that publicly. But then he told me he did have sex with her. Oral sex. Only. Then he claimed later on that he had sexual intercourse with her. So something was wrong with the Brewer story. And I have met with many sex workers. And I've gotten to know them pretty well. And what they all told me, without exception, is that you don't go on a date unless you get paid first. You just don't do that. It's just unheard of in the industry. So how did she get paid? She had only a few dollars in her wallet, which she's found, and $300? Didn't sound right. Something bothered me. So we started to finally investigate further. It took me a while because I bought what the police said. The police bought this. They believed Brewer and they believed Pat. They gave them lie detector tests. And if you saw the police that appeared on the Gone Girls documentary, the cop said, I think it was Don Verone, he said, it was the tall guy, Stewart, I forgot his last name. But Stewart said they passed the lie detector test. That's not accurate. Brewer actually had inconclusive results. Big difference. And Pat fell asleep during his lie detector exam. He fell asleep. What does that tell you? You're being investigated for murder and you fall asleep? All right? So they didn't pass a lie detector. The cops are not even giving you the right story on that. Something's really wrong here. A Burke was in charge of all this. Okay? So this bothered me. So of course it bothered me. But I never looked at the source. How did this all start? Brewer said he made a call. He went on Craigslist. Actually, it was Backpage that supposedly where she advertised, not Craigslist. And he, in a phone call that lasted a minute or 2 minutes at most, they made all these arrangements, and they went all the way to Oak Beach without a problem. That didn't make any sense either. So we looked further. And I learned that Shannan Gilbert on July 2nd, 2007, she worked for a group called the Lace Party Girls. If you want to look up on the internet, when I made these notes, which is only about a few months ago, Lace Party Girls is still in business. It's a sex trafficking ring. Okay? She, on July 2nd, 2007, gets busted in Jersey City, New Jersey. Gets busted in Upper Saddle River in a hotel in New Jersey for prostitution and dealing in drugs. Okay? She gets busted along with a guy named Joseph Ruiz, who ran the ring. He ran it out of a building on Sherman Avenue in Jersey City, if you know Jersey City at all. Right? She worked in that ring. And then I spoke to a girl who was one of the leaders of the ring. And we had a long conversation together, and I confirmed what she said with documents that I received, which I won't tell you where from, because I can't. And what I learned was that that bust went down. It was a huge bust, a multi-state bust, because they were running a ring that serviced Long Island, New York City, New Jersey, and other spots all throughout the country. And Ruiz had come up with an ingenious scheme. Instead of having in the John, you'd come over and the John would give you drugs and you'd get paid $300 and you do your thing and that would be over. That would be the end of it. Okay? So parenthetically, another thing that bothered me about the Shannon case. $300, and then she agreed to stay overtime for another 2 hours. She was there since 2 o'clock until after 4. She was there from 1 o'clock until after 4 for one tryst. And I talking to all the sex workers I know, they all said, once the man finishes his thing, whatever he's doing, right, it's over. Whether it's 10 minutes or half an hour, you pay for an hour, but once that happens, it's over, and that's the end of the trick. They all do that. And this woman stayed for hours? with Brewer? That doesn't make any sense.
So based on her family history and the sister that had a psychotic episode that
Yeah.
murdered the mother, stabbed her 227 times or something.
Correct.
Could it be, because Shannan Gilbert also had a history of mental illness, so could it be that maybe she had an episode that night and just
No,
freaked out?
I don't believe that for one New York minute, second. Okay, I don't, and I'll tell you why. But it could be, I guess, anything could be. But I doubt it, very, very much. All right, Shannon was an experienced sex worker. And not only was she in this ring with lace party girls, but her driver in the ring was Michael Pack. He packed a gun. He was a professional driver. He claimed that he just would help out girls on Facebook and so on, and he was just independent. That's just not true at all. All right, he was completely in sex trafficking. He had gone to jail, bringing in people from Thailand illegally. He had gone and been busted for human trafficking already once before. He was a pro at what he did, and he was one of the top drivers for Ruiz. So she gets busted with Ruiz, and the little game that they figured out that worked beautifully was to reverse the order. Instead of the John giving you the drugs, Shannon bought the drugs, and you paid a lot of money for her and the drugs combined. And we found out that Shannan Gilbert, and it's in writing in the official documents, she was making $2,500 to $5,000 per trick. Okay? She was one of their top earners. So the whole story about Joe Brewer and all the other things that came that they say later on, she was psychotic, she was all this nonsense, is bull. If these things are true. Okay? Then it turns out that on June 30th, Ruiz gets busted on money laundering, narcotic trafficking, promoting prostitution, and conspiracy. A few months later, the building that they're renting on Sherman Avenue is owned by a guy named Paul Benson, who's in cahoots with them. And Paul Benson runs a child pornography operation where he was selling, and he got busted with over 30,000 images of children in this whole thing. And he was busted in a multi-state bust, multi-state law enforcement bust. New York got in it, so on. And it was led by a man you may know. The bust was led by the Suffolk County Police Department by Dominic Barone, the former chief of police. And that bust took place on October 15th, it took place on October 15, 2009. So, in that small, before Shannon disappears in May of 2010, Dominic Barone, Suffolk County Police, is well aware of who's getting busted and what in this ring. He never once mentioned to the public or to anybody that he was aware of Shannan Gilbert and her role in this whole thing. That's kind of odd. That should be investigated, shouldn't it? And what's even more interesting is that Shannon became a cooperating witness. You know what a cooperating witness is? All right, you know the risk they take when they cooperate? So she could get out of the bus she was in? Does that sound like somebody psychotic? Or somebody very careful and scheming? She was a cooperating witness. Now I ask you this. When she disappears on May 1st, 2010, she's still a cooperating witness, and only a few days later she was about to testify in the case in New Jersey. And she disappears that night.
Different story.
Okay? And did you ever hear of a police department not protecting their cooperating witness and not trying to find her? Well, there was a New Jersey City detective that did try to find her. His name was Cesar Camacho. He became a friend of mine. I sat with him and had dinner with him and so on. And Cesar was investigating it, and he thought that Peter Hackett was the chief suspect. Chief suspect, not the only suspect. And then they suddenly pulled him off the case. He told me, and he said, I just dropped the case. I don't know why. They never told me, and I was no longer on the case. Joe Ruiz, for all of the bust that he took for a national ring rather, of this, guess what he did? He did a few months in jail. And he was out and set up another ring in California. Now he's doing 14 years for that. That's who he was. Michael Pack was the driver for this organization. They were making a ton of money. Did you really think she went on Walpurgis night, the night of the witches, that the witches celebrate all over the world, that she went that night at midnight is when she's supposed, for $300 to Oak Beach, and she said, they're trying to kill me, but we imagine they don't exist. What do you think's going on here? Shouldn't that be investigated? Shouldn't the police who've insisted that this is a tragic accident with no evidence of that whatsoever, should they be investigated as to why they've been insisting on this right along? I have this evidence, I'll testify to it if I have to. So, by the way, Pack claimed that, that morning when he left her, he claimed that he went to drop off, to pick up some money that another pimp was going to come to meet him on Horace Harding Boulevard along the Long Island Expressway in Queens by a Dunkin' Donut here, and they were going to put it into some one of those bank deposit things for the organization. Why would he be doing that if he was just an independent contractor, like he claimed? He wasn't. That's why. And I talked to the guy he did meet. He was in Miami. I found him, and I spoke to him. And he couldn't explain. And he, that night, had a girl himself who bolted from his car. So he remembered it very well. That morning, when he went there, he said he didn't go there to give Pack money. He went there to deposit money when they met. Michael Pack, claiming that he did that morning, implicates him because we know now, the research I've done, that sex trafficking organization actually ran by credit card. You paid in advance by credit card. You can still do so. You can go to Lace Party Girls and you can pay by credit card. Here's how they advertise on the AAA Party Girls. Book New York escort agencies and quench your sexual thirst. That's their advertisement. Okay? They are making a fortune using credit cards. That's how the night got set up. Whoever, whether it was Brewer or somebody else, contacted the organization and they got paid. That's how she got paid. That's why she went. That organization never would have let her go without having been paid first. And that she was gone for 5 hours, 4 to 5 hours, before she suddenly has a problem, should tell you something. Something big was going on there. Because even if I laid out $5,000 for her and she came out there that night to me and I'm a punt, John, and I'm a pimp or whatever, I'm waiting for her. I'm not paying for 5 hours. Nobody is, unless it's a group, unless something else is going down. And she tells you it's a group when she says they're trying to kill me, and she says to Pack, you're part of this. And I suggest to you something else. Did anybody ever consider when you listen to the tape, that it's a tape that I got, in case you didn't know that, I sued the Suffolk County Police Department twice, 2 appeals, and I won. And I got the tape. And that's what forced them to eventually give it up so the public could hear it. On that tape, it was, she might be psychologically off, something, she must have been confused, she sounds confused. She speaks just the way her sister spoke, the same slur. I hear no difference whatsoever. She's not crazy, she's not on drugs. But, does it occur to anybody that maybe Brewer's house was the first house that when you got there you went to, before you went to the party, wherever it was. But she had gone back in, instead of her running out after 5 hours with Brewer, or whatever, 4 or 5 hours, instead, She entered into his house from somewhere else while she was trying to get away from those who were trying to kill her. And if you start with that as a possibility, not necessarily, but start with that as a possibility, all of a sudden, everything she says on that tape is perfectly rational. It makes perfect sense. And now she's stuck in a Sophie's choice. Do I stay here and they come in and get me, or do I try to make it out of here? And she made the right choice. And as fate would have it, unfortunately, it was the wrong choice. But, do you see the point? If she had gone back into that house, that makes sense. Try it. Listen to the tape after I've told you that and see how it works out.
How much did Drew pay? You must have been able to subpoena the credit card, right?
No, we don't even know where your credit cards were. We had no idea. I only found all this out, by the way, long after, years later. But I would gladly do that if we could find out where the organization operated from. We don't have any of that evidence, so we can't. We don't know. But that makes much more sense, doesn't it, than everything else you've heard so far. So I'm giving you a lot of, what did I call them? Trail markers, right? For you to see. What did the police do here? What did they do, or what did they fail to do? They even put up a show where they put deceiving slides on the screen for you to see to support their theory. When Byra gave this presentation, Lieutenant Byra, back in April, as I said, April 13th, back 2 years ago, where he tried to say Shannon died of a tragic accident, they put up various slides, and one of them was a slide saying, look, she walked into the marsh at night, and he showed a picture of the marsh, and there were all these weeds that you could see in the light from the cameras, and everything pitch black behind them. Except I walked I walked in the marsh from where the police claimed she entered. They believe she entered, and I walked to where she was found. Within a week of her death, only a year and a half later, a year later, and at that time of the day when she makes the phone call at 4:53 a.m., the sun is already starting to break. Dawn is breaking. By the time she would have been in there, because she knocked on Barbara Brennan's door, and Clay's door, then Brennan's door, and then she disappears, it would have been about 5:30. At 5:40, the sun's up. And this is in May, okay? It wasn't dark. You could see into the homes of the people on our walk. You could see into the homes, and you could see them having their coffee before they go to work. She did not disappear and get lost in the dark. That's a lie. And if you see where the marsh meets the road in any part of Oak Beach whatsoever, it's a wall higher than I am of sticker bushes and brambles and so on, wrapped together so tightly you can't get in unless you cut your way in, or you find a hole, an opening. You think she went all running around in the semi-dark trying to find an opening to get in there and found a way in and made her way through. It's complete nonsense. They know it's nonsense.
Was she found half naked?
She was found with her trousers, I'm using old-fashioned thing, sorry. Her jeans were off right behind Hackett's house. And her jeans, pocketbook, cell phone, and one or two perfume bottle, cap, and a brush were found with her pocketbook. And then the rest of her was found about a third of a mile away, east. And she was wearing a white top and a bra, with the bra cut. It's not ripped, it's not torn. There's an elastic holding the two cups together. And it's actually perfectly cut. It's not ripped. Did animals eat that? That doesn't make much sense. And that's how she's found. And it was Dormer, the police commissioner, who had Verona as his assistant, who announced that she drowned before they found the body. How can you know that somebody drowned if they hadn't found the body? It's absurd. And they never did a diatome test to see if she drowned. So what's wrong here? Lots wrong here, yeah?
Didn't she make a phone call, and asking somebody for help, and she said she didn't know where she was?
Yeah, she called 911.
Yeah, but how did she not know where she was? Like,
She she'd never been there apparently, having been there, didn't really know the area. She was, serviced somebody there.
She relatively didn't know where she was. She knew she was by Jones Beach.
She did. She knew she was somewhere near Jones Beach. You're right about that. Yes. But more than that, that's why there was a delay switching the call from Suffolk County to the state police. Because she didn't know, she just said Jones Beach. So they said, oh, state police.
She really, in hindsight, wasn't that far from that location.
No.
Yeah.
But in fact, when she's found, the police helicopters had been over that Monday. She disappeared on Saturday morning. They were over on Monday looking around for her. They didn't see her. They had those helicopters with the infrared that can detect you. She wasn't found. Yeah, it's kind of odd, right? So, but there's so much more to investigate than to just say must have been an accident. We're guessing at it, but it's okay. And there's no other connection. Yeah, I'm just giving you the first time it's been out there, so you should feel lucky, right? Anyway, I think my time is up, and thank you all for your very good questions.